Speaking of Joel Embiid, we close with the Sixers
Oh,
Raptors, the final playoff series that has been set. And I think the one I'm most excited to watch, both because of the matchup chess on paper, but also because of like how nuclear things could get if the Sixers play really poorly and you're dealing
yeah,
with James Harden's upcoming free agency and Doc Rivers' future. We know that you're secretly rooting for the Raptors because you want a new head coach in Philly.
right.
Lakers
Exactly.
fans should definitely be rooting for the Sixers.
Yeah, they should.
What just take me, you are like the best person to have on for this specific series. Like, what are you just thinking leading into it? Aside
Um,
from that, Matisse Thybulle should just get uh the booster.
sure. Yeah. No, he got one shot. He just didn't get the second one. Uh, I just have a pit of dread in my stomach about this series. Like maybe it's. I mean, the regular season, the Raptors won 3-1. The last two games they played within the past month, James Harden, like after the James Harden trade, you just have to throw out, full regular season results for the Sixers don't matter because everything before James Harden's debut, who cares? They're a totally different team now. They played twice in the last month, lost both times. Fred VanVleet and OG Anunoby missed both of those games. So assuming those guys are back and I don't think they're going to be fully healthy, but playing, certainly concerning based on what we've seen recently. The Raptors, I mean, I've been talking about, matchups kind of dictating, whether who wins a playoff series. And the Raptors just feel like a really effing bad match for the Sixers for a number of reasons. They don't have a clear answer for Joel Embiid. So that is where if you're mapping out a path to a Sixers victory, it is Joel Embiid using the spite that he feels about Nikola Jokic winning MVP for the second straight season to just drop 40-20 every game. Because that's honestly what they're going to need out of him. But this version of James Harden, can he beat switches? I don't know anymore, which is very concerning. And if he can't, the Raptors have no shortage of 6'8", 6'9" guys that they can throw at him. They learned their lesson. I mean, like teams early on were blitzing Harden and daring someone else to beat them, and the Sixers are very capable of doing that. But if you can just switch between, OG, Scotty, and Pascal on Harden, and he can't beat those guys off the dribble, it's going to be a long series for the Sixers.
Yeah, I will still maintain that the attention James Harden draws feels like it's still been important to the supplementary offensive players, looking at Maxey and even Tobias Harris, who the last time you were on this podcast, we absolutely destroyed his performance on the court, and he's somewhat suddenly turned things around. But yeah, I don't like the Raptors are built to make life difficult, even on a team that has just James Harden being James Harden. And we saw it in their most recent matchup where it's like, no, they're not going to keep the ball out of Joel Embiid's hands, but they're going to make you run through a zillion different labyrinths to get the ball to him. And that's going to burn time off the shot clock. They have the ability to throw multiple bodies at him if they want. And you can't, who are you hunting on this team? Like, oh, Precious Achiuwa is on James Harden. They don't fucking care. They probably want that.
Right. Yeah. There is no weak link defensively, or not, at least not one that they can target. Whereas, I mean, the Raptors in the fourth quarter of that game recently really went after Tyrese Maxey. Like they put Embiid on Siakam, and then they just spammed Siakam, Gary Trent Jr. pick and rolls and went right after Maxey. So that is another concern. I mean, Maxey is going to be, is great offensively and has settled into the number 3 option probably better than anyone could have anticipated. But are they going to be able to play him off the floor? Like, are they going to just, I don't think they will, like to the extent that the Sixers literally take him off the floor because they don't have a better option. But can they figure out a way to protect him from getting, roasted as an individual defender?
How big is Tyball's absence in the games that take place in Toronto, knowing that Philly's, I guess, like their weakest defensive link is their ability to probably defend in transition, I would argue. And now not having him, is this just like Danny Green needs to wind back the clock a half decade? What is the answer?
Yeah, I mean, they just don't have another wing defender. It's like Shake Milton is going to play the most minutes at that position. Otherwise, it is Furkan Korkmaz or like Charlie Brown Jr., who I think is on a two-way and isn't even eligible for the playoffs now that I think about it. So yeah, I mean, I think it's big, but who were we talking about earlier? Oh, Boston with like, does Robert Williams' injury actually force them into the best lineup for this specific matchup? And I do wonder if Thybulle's decision not to get vaccinated or not to get fully vaccinated also made Doc Rivers stumble ass backwards into the best possible lineup for this series. Because I think Danny Green, when Thybulle's on the court, the Raptors just completely ignore him. They're like, all right, cool. If you want to shoot threes, great. We're going to sag so far off of you to clog up driving lanes and to throw help at Joel Embiid. We don't care. You can take 100 threes. We'll live with the result, especially over a 7-game series. Danny Green, not nearly as good defensively as Thybulle or, at what he was in his prime, but a much, much better shooter. So the offensive spacing, I think, is going to be a lot better. With that said, yeah, it's a concern, especially if Danny gets into foul trouble, because again, they just don't really have any other options. I will say the thing that works in their favor in that regard is the Raptors don't have that like elite wing scorer like Kevin Durant, the Tatum, Paul George, Kawhi Leonard. So like not that Thybulle or Green could have handled someone like that anyway, but the Raptors might not have the personnel to exploit his absence in that way.
Who's the person you're throwing Thybulle on when he's playing? Is it Fred VanVleet? It's not Fred VanVleet, is it?
I mean, because Fred's been just so inconsistent with that knee injury since the All-Star break. So maybe OG Anunoby. I don't know.
He's also been banged up a lot. He was playing really well.
Yeah. I mean, the Raptors are going to be fascinating because I just don't know who they threw. Like they started Siakam, Precious Achiuwa, Scotty Barnes, and Khem Birch, and then Gary Trent Jr. in that game the other day. So I think that means Scotty Barnes.
That lineup struggled to score.
It did, but I think that means Scotty Barnes played at the 2, like started at the 2. So I'm interested to see who they trot out in their starting 5. Khem Birch had no chance against Embiid. I don't think he plays a ton in this series. And they're going to have a short bench, like I think Thad and Chris Boucher, and that's probably all she wrote there. But I mean, I think the Raptors, like that, it's similar where the Sixers have the better top end talent, but I think the Raptors match up better against the Sixers than the Sixers do the Raptors.
Do you have any like thoughts on how the Sixers can try and navigate? I don't want to say the non-star minutes, but the way they're going to stagger their stars. You wrote about this for Forbes, and I knew that the Harden maxi minutes without Embiid were terrible. I did not realize that the Embiid maxi minutes the Harden without maxi or Embiid minutes, since they were originally tethering those two together, were bad. I didn't look enough to see that the Embiid maxi minutes without Harden weren't that great either. And so, like, what is the course of action here for Doc Rivers? Pray.
Whatever his gut instinct says, do the other thing. That's probably. I don't know. I mean, it's going to be tough. I think you have to space the floor. So I think probably Shake, Yang, and Danny Green with Embiid and Maxey would make the most sense. And then the backup big question for Philly is going to be looming large in this series as well. Doc very condescendingly said that when the opponent has a small backcourt, they're going to go Paul Reed, and then when they have a big backcourt, they're going to go Andre Drummond, which makes sense, and that's what people have been clamoring for. As while we've been watching DeAndre Jordan, trot his lifeless corpse up and down the court for a month, but Doc had not been doing that up until the last couple of games. So, like I think Reed is going to play in this series. I don't think DeAndre should or is going to very much. I mean, in the game the previous game, not the one recently, he played 11 minutes and was a -10, and they lost by 5. So that speaks, and somehow I don't think it accurately captured how bad DeAndre Jordan was in this matchup. So I think we see not a lot of Paul Reed because you're going to play Embiid 40 minutes or so, but we'll see Paul Reed for the backup big minutes. Doc has talked about like the concern about him getting into foul trouble. And it's like, bro, he's playing 10 minutes a game. Is he really going to rack up 6 fouls in 10 minutes? Or if he does, like, okay, dust off DeAndre Jordan or dust off Paul Millsap for like 2 minutes if you need to, but give Paul Reed the first crack at the backup big. And I think he will.
What was the quote he had the other night on Paul Reed? It was like, this is not the Paul we're not going to make this the Paul Reed show.
The Paul Reed victory tour.
Oh, the Paul victory tour. Like, is there, moving this to the Raptors, is there like an element of they could hamper themselves in this series? Because even over this elite stretch that they've had, which has basically lasted half the season at this point, their half-court offense has not been great. They're relying on cleaning up a lot of misses or getting out in transition. Again, I don't know that it'll be a problem to get out in transition against Philly. They are around league average in three-point efficiency during this stretch, but they're also 26th in three-point attempt rate. Like, they're just not locked and loaded with a lot of shooters, in part because, as you mentioned, they're not playing lineups with a ton of shooters. If their full cast is available, and I'm looking at their injury report right now, I'm not used to seeing no current injuries for any team, let alone the Raptors, but no current injuries to report, believe it or not. But I know Siakam is different. Like, this isn't the same player who couldn't dribble, it felt like, in a straight line against Boston in 2020. There's more directionality to his drives, better decision-making. He is just a much better player than he was then. And you still do have Fred VanVleet, who I feel like has done better in the like point guardish type of role, where he needs to have more influence over the offense. You've run reps through Scotty Barnes in crunch time, and there's been some flashes there. Gary Trent Jr. can be electric, but there's still just something about this half-court offense that feels, if not solvable, like it can go through slumps of its own accord. And I do think a lot of that has to do with like Nick Nurse. And this is probably because when you look at the bench, there just aren't any secondary creators. Some of these units he's running out, they're not built to score. Like, he's just egregiously saying, like, we're going to play a bunch of like-sized guys and it's going to hurt our offense, but that's just what we're going to do. Does that give you any hope if you're the Sixers, or are we past the point of where we should actually be concerned about the aesthetics of Toronto's offense a lot of the time?
Yeah, it doesn't give me a ton of hope because I think they're just going to lean even more heavily on that starting group. And it's not like the Sixers bench has been any better. Like, the Sixers are also a very top heavy group. They're going to play their top 4.
And Thad's been at least like, you can point to that guy coming off the bench and playing really well.
Yeah. And I think like, Boucher too.
Yeah. And Boucher, I was going to say, and the Sixers, it's like, well,
George Niang, I think he will be a consistent member off the bench, and he will knock down some big shots at times.
It was Furkan in like October, November. Right?
Yeah. And like, Shake is finding his footing lately. Matisse will play in the games in Philly. Presumably, I think they're going to just keep Danny in the starting lineup the whole time. I don't think they want to go back and forth. But yeah, other than that, it's like, pray John Hollinger was right about Paul Reed.
Last thing before X Factors, the Sixers will win this series if
James Harden is James Harden.
Would you even guarantee that they win if James Harden is James Harden? And let's make it not playoff James Harden, but like regular season James Harden.
No, because Doc Rivers versus Nick Nurse is the biggest mismatch. We've discussed a lot of mismatches on this episode. That is the single biggest mismatch in the first round of the playoffs.
Yeah, I've just very much, the Raptors just do things on defense with lineups that I hate, that I don't understand, that tend to work out. So yeah, I agree with you there. Who is your X factor for the Sixers in this series?
Danny Green. I think we just, especially given the absence of Matisse, if he is able to play, like, I just don't know if he's even able to play 40 minutes a game over the course of the series. And I think they're going to need him to. Tobias is another one. You mentioned him earlier. Like, he really struggled in those first couple games with Harden, but has gotten so much better lately. Like, he finally, after 2 years of Doc Rivers just begging him to catch and shoot, he finally is just catching and shooting now. So, he's going to have to, Lord knows the Raptors have no shortage of 6'8" guys. So he's going to have to take on someone. I don't know if they'll start. I guess if they start their normal 5, the Raptors do, Embiid will start on Siakam, and then Tobias is probably on Scotty Barnes. But then that probably means Danny Green on OG, and then where do you hide Harden? Maybe you hide Harden on OG and put Danny Green on Gary Trent, and then Maxey on Fred VanVleet. Like, this is another one where it feels like the Raptors have more answers against the Sixers than the Sixers do the Raptors, and that's not even including the coaching.
My X factor for them was Tobias Harris. You laid out basically why on offense. Like, if he's going to play like he's been playing, that'll be huge for them. And I guess it's not necessarily, I mean, they need it. If James Harden is going to be hitting shots like this, he's going to get rid of the ball. Tobias Harris is going to be open, needs to make shots. But I'm also like, you mentioned him defending Scotty Barnes. Based off some of the lineups that Nick Nurse is going to throw out there are going to be reps where he has to guard Pascal Siakam, probably. Yeah. And I've also just wondered, and I don't know how out there this is, but like, given some of the lineups that the Raptors throw out there, like, is there a Tobias Harris at center scenario here that the Sixers should be exploring if they just refuse to break out Paul Reed?
I think they're going to break out Paul Reed. They did in the last game, and they have over the last couple of games of the season. But I would much rather see a Tobias and Yang front court than I would DeAndre Jordan. DeAndre Jordan has absolutely no place in this series, and if he plays a single minute, Doc Rivers is point shaving.
Your X factor for the Raptors.
I mean, where do you even any of the guy? I mean, Siakam's too important. Fred VanVleet, he's too important to be an X factor, but if he's hampered at all, is at least something I will be keeping an eye on. I think probably I'm split between OG and Scotty Barnes just because they can do everything. And, what we haven't seen a ton of OG lately. I mean, I know he came back for a couple games at the end of the season, but otherwise missed a ton of time right after the All-Star break. So he looked fine, but I'm just going to keep an eye on, does that finger injury hamper him at all? And then Scotty is just so versatile. Right. So depending on who's guarding him, whether it's Tobias or Danny Green at first, can he make them pay for that? Because if he can, then the Sixers just don't have answers up and down the lineup, and this is going to be a shorter series than I think a lot of us are expecting.
I went with OG as well, just because it feels like, not that he's unknown, but he's just dealt with so many stop and starts this season. I did entertain Scotty Barnes also because it's does he see time on Joel Embiid in this series? I guess functionally he should not, but he might see time on everybody. And he's also the first rookie since, I think, Damian Lillard to average over 35 minutes a game in over 70 appearances. So this is someone who has played a lot. Is the rookie wall ever going to be a thing with him? Or is he just going to be, I know he struggled at some point in the season, but also just can he shoulder that workload in the playoffs? But I think it's just OG Anunoby, maybe because I'm curious more than anything else about what he's going to look like if he's playing heavy minutes over a consistent period of time.
Yeah, for sure.
Predictions.
I'm going Raptors in 6.
I'm going to go Raptors in 7. I came dangerously close to predicting the Raptors to come out of the East for Bleacher Report, but I flaked on that prediction. We went over it. There's so many matchup problems here, and I'm not going to assume that James Harden doesn't make his shots in this series or looks like he's moving really slow. Even if you told me that he's great, I don't know that the Sixers are deep enough to overcome just the breadth of different looks the Raptors can throw at them, who are not particularly deep themselves, but their top 7 guys are going to just wreak hell on defense for Philly.
Yeah. The Sixers are just so not flexible in what they can do. Their personnel is just not flexible, especially with Matisse being out for at least for 3 of these games.
That was the other thing, yeah.
And so, I think I'm guessing they split the first 2 in Philly. Toronto wins 3 and 4 back home without Matisse. Sixers win game 5, and then the Raptors close them out in 6. Because, the Raptors can throw out so many different styles of lineups, and Nick Nurse is so creative. And who like is willing to throw a box and one. Like, who knows what they're going to be able to do. The Sixers, I will say, shout out to Austin Krell of the Painted Lines for this idea. The Raptors have struggled against zone this year, and the Sixers have been more willing to do it than they have in years past. So, like, I as much as it's easy to poke fun at Doc Rivers and to, pray for him to be the coach of the Lakers next year, like, this is a big Doc Rivers series. Like, if he's going to be going against one of the smartest, most innovative coaches in the NBA, he has the top end talent advantage, but like the matchups do not favor the Sixers here. So can he junk this up and, force the Raptors half court offense to sputter? I think is one of the biggest questions.
Brian, this was great. Thank you so much for going in detail on every series that we know about heading into Thursday. Can you tell our listeners where they can find you and all the great work that you do?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at btoporek, so BTOPOREK. I cover mostly the Sixers, but also some salary cap stuff at Forbes Sports. So I'll be doing a bunch of stuff heading into free agency. And then you can find my podcast, the NBA podcast, wherever podcasts are found. And Dan, thank you as always for having me on. I'm happy to come back in 2 weeks to celebrate Doc Rivers' newest job with the Lakers.
Thank you again, Brian. As you know, I'll be pestering you again down the line.
Please do.